Hello, and today we're going to go over taking off, engine management, flying the P51 in general, and landing the P51. So first of all, we're going to have to taxi out to the runway. So what we want to do is put the prop to max. We'll just wait for this SU-25 to go past. Now, any time when you're in a tail dragger and your manifold pressure is over idle, you want to keep the stick fully back, just so the tail doesn't come up. Now, in the P51, you see, just turning with the rudder doesn't really do much. So we're actually going to have to use differential brake as well, so you see it turns much better. The default keys for differential brake are left control W for left brake and left alt W for right brake, and having W overall in general as the main brake, or both brakes together. So it's safer to taxi slower with a tail dragger and keep the stick back the whole time, and you'll have very few problems. It's very easy to taxi the P51 because it has a the tail wheel isn't free castering. It's not like a trolley wheel unless you make it. So it's actually locked to 6 degrees either side of movement. So you can. This is how you can turn using the rudder. If you push the stick forwards, be careful to keep off the throttle when you're doing this, so you don't tip over. You can actually, you see, spin it round, and this unlocks the tail wheel, so it makes it turning corners very easily. You have to watch out you don't nose over. Okay, so on takeoff, there's going to be a few effects. We're going to have P factor and slipstream effects on the rudder caused by the propeller. So what we're going to be doing is, as soon as we advance the power, you need right rudder to counteract this. You'll see the plane will want to veer off to the left, but I'll put in right rudder. We'll turn that on just so you can see. Now on takeoff, we're going to want full propeller. This gives us, this is the RPM lever on the left here. This will give us full power on takeoff, and this will set the RPM to 3000 once the engine gets going. So what we're going to do is just ease up the power. Now, if you're new to this, you might want to just go up to 35, which is about here, or I normally go up to 45 for a reasonably length runway like this, and you just use the rudders to keep it straight. And then when you get to a certain speed, we're just going to push the stick forwards about half, and you see the nose will just come down, and we'll be just sitting on the runway. And then when you're ready, maybe about 150 miles an hour, you can just gradually pull back on the stick, and the plane will come into the air. Then what you want to do is bring up the gear, and you can see indicated by the lights down here that that it's retracting, and it will go off when it's locked, and you can hear the sound actually. So on climb out, we're going to need a slight right rudder just to keep the ball centered. You see the ball here. I'll explain more about that when we're flying along and doing the engine management. And for climb out, we'll want to bring the RPM back just a little bit, just to 28. So you see the RPM gauge just here, and now that's on 28. So each notch represents 100 RPM, and the RPM can be changed using this prop lever here, which is also changed using page up and page down. Then the throttle obviously controls the manifold pressure here, so we're just going to keep that on 45. So this is a good setting for climb out, and it doesn't stress the engine as much as full power. The main things you want to keep your eyes on is the coolant temperature and the oil temperature. So this here is the coolant temp, it's currently in the green. If this goes to the end of this scale, you'll probably get a sudden engine seizure, and that's when the prop snaps and comes to a stop straight away. And then the oil temperature, if that gets out and into this sort of 100 degrees Celsius, then you'll get problems there as well, and the engine will come to a stop as well. So we'll just climb out here. Now we're done climbing, so we're just going to level off, and when we level off, we're going to pull the RPM back down to 27. This is max continuous. This is the maximum amount you can run the P51 for a long period, for an extended period of time. So this is 45 manifold pressure and 2700 RPM. Normally when flying around, I maintain this. And then you'll see we'll actually start gaining speed now. We should get up to about 300 miles an hour for cruise speed. So we'll just keep the ball centered using the rudder. Alright, so now we're at 300 miles an hour. We're just you see with neutralized rudder, you can see the ball is off to the left. This means our nose is slightly pointing to the right. If I exaggerate this by putting more rudder in, you can see that the plane will actually be flying sideways. If you look at our ground track, we're not moving along the direction of the nose. So this is what this ball here represents. So if we level off again, don't touch the rudder, you can see the ball will settle out slightly to the left. We've just lost a bit of speed, so I'm just going to dive here. And there we go. So now we're at 300 miles an hour down here. And we're just going to slowly tap in notches of left rudder until that ball centers out. And there you go. Now the ball is nice and center. Oh, slightly a bit too far. There we go. So now the ball's center. So this means we're flying coordinated. So now we're not skidding through the air at all. So you want to do this when you get to your cruise speed. So with max continuous, this is 300 miles an hour. And just in case you guys don't have rudder assigned, the rudder trim can be found down here. And you can also use the keybind right control Z and X for the rudder. Okay, so you see when you go into a turn though, the plane will become uncoordinated again. So this needs to be counteracted with slight rudder into the turn you're going. You see we're making a right turn. We're making a right turn here, and we're needing slight right rudder. Not very much at all, so it's barely noticeable. If we steepen the turn, you maybe see it more. Just correcting with the right rudder there. If we roll out, you see while we're rolling, without any rudder, the ball will actually throw to the outside, which means you need slight rudder in the direction of roll as well. This is caused by adverse yaw on the P51, but it's not as much as other planes. Gliders is a very if you ever fly a glider, you'll notice that the adverse yaw from that while rolling is a lot more, and you definitely need to correct with rudder. Okay, so there's a few other settings with the P51. There's a rule with all constant speed props that are called prop on top, which means that your throttle, let's just get rid of the guy for a second, your throttle here, this thing, should not go in front of the propeller lever. Okay, otherwise this can lug the engine, it puts a lot of torque through the engine, it can damage the crankshaft and things. So what we can do is, if we want to go full power, we'll have to go full RPM, so the prop's all the way forwards if we want to go full power. What we can also do is bring the power back to max cruise. So max cruise is 36 manifold and 2400 RPM, or top of the greens is the best way to recognize it. So you see there, we'll maintain about 280 miles an hour, and that's also a nice, that's if you're cruising. It will consume way less fuel than max continuous, but it's only, as I said, it's 20 miles an hour slower. Now, another thing about the RPM, you want higher RPMs for climb. So, sort of, I normally judge it around 27 being my cruise, and I'll go up to 28 for climbs, and down to 26 for descents. You don't really need to apply, you don't really need to decrease RPM for climbs, unless you're trying to get away from someone. For example, in combat, if you want to get away from someone, you may want to decrease your RPM in the dive just to get away. Like if we bring the RPM down to 26 and we make a dive here, you'll see if we put the propeller just next to the throttle, you'll see we'll dive away very, very fast, and we're at basically 400 miles an hour now. That's a useful way of getting away. Just going to put it up to 27 here. Right, so as I said, just to recap, higher prop for climbs, lower prop for descent, and about 27 for flying straight and level, unless you're using some other setting like max cruise. So we're going to look for the airport, and we're going to go and do a landing. Also to note, are the radiator settings on here. You've got the oil and coolant radiators. They're set on auto by default. If you're getting really competitive, what you can do is close the radiator, and that will allow you to go a little bit faster, but then of course your coolant temperature is going to get much higher when it's on close. So you'll have to keep an eye on those temps if you're closing them and things. So for now we'll just keep it on auto, just since we're not actually in combat or anything. Right, so we'll head back to the airfield and we'll demonstrate two types of landing. So there's the airfield off to our right over there. We'll make a landing on Vaziani, just for ease of purpose. So in the P51s there's two types of landing that you can do. There's a 3-point and there's a 2-point, or a wheel landing is what the 2-point is sometimes called. So we're just going to bring the power back and maintain our altitude just to slow down here. Now the 3-point landing is probably, you've probably guessed by now, you land on all three wheels at the same time. So we'll just demonstrate that one first. This is the easier one to do of the two. And I'll show you that all you've got to do is just keep the plane above the runway. I'll show you what I mean when we get down. So when we get to about 200 miles an hour we can start bringing out flaps. So we'll just bring out a tiny... see the flap restrictions are actually here. So 10 degrees you can take flaps out at 400 miles an hour, 20 degrees 275 and so on. So there are panels on the side, like these are all the engine limitations here, so max cruise, max continuous, oil temps and things. And then these are the diving speeds. So there's a lot of information on the sides which is worth a look at some point. Okay, so now we're going to do a 3-point landing. This involves landing on all three wheels at the same time. You see we've already got our gear out, judging by the green light there, and we're just going to bring out 30 flaps now. Now this will involve, when we land on all three wheels at the same time, what we'll have to do first is keep the aeroplane just above the ground by keeping the stick back until the plane stalls onto the ground. Okay, so we'll just make a nice gentle turn here. It looks like we're a little bit too far out to make a glide approach. A little bit too slow. Glide approaches are always the safest because it means since you're in a one-engine aircraft, if the engine stops you can still make it to the runway. So actually we could do a glide approach here, but I'm just going to give it full flaps just now, so the flaps coming down. So we're just going to round out. We're just going to keep it just above the runway. Okay, so just keep it just above the runway, and then you see it touches down on all three wheels at the same time. When you get it on the ground, make sure you get the stick all the way back, and then once the stick's all the way back you can start braking the aircraft to slow it down. Now if you brake too much, what will happen is the nose will come up and you don't want that to happen, so keep the stick back and try not to brake too much. With the, when you press W you see it goes up like that, so what if you do, if you tap it at the right point you can hold it just about 70% on the brakes. So there's no need to be afraid of braking with the P51, it doesn't actually tip over that easily, but as long as you've got that stick back. Okie dokie. Okay, so now we're just going to make a alright, we're back at downwind. We're going to make a nice approach to do a 2-point this time. So the approach is a little different. We're just going to be a little higher up, a little faster, because we're going to be touching down at about 110 rather than 90 miles an hour. So we've got 3 notches of flaps, or 30 degrees, and we're going to be bringing it down nice and steeply. We'll just keep holding off the flaps just so we can land a little bit further down the runway. And with the 2-point, or the wheel landing, we're going to be landing on the 2 main wheels at first. So we'll keep it just above the runway and then we'll give it a little push. So just keep an eye on that thing on the left, which tells you where the stick position is. So that we're nice and high, we're nice and fast. Just be ready to, we'll round out, which will bleed off the majority of our speed. So we'll round out, and then once we're level with the runway, we're just going to hover it above it and then just push on the stick. You see, there you go, it comes down nicely onto the runway. We keep the stick pushed into the ground, and then once the tail comes onto the ground and we're below stall speed, we're going to bring the stick back just to keep us nice and straight. And then you can apply brake just like with the 3-point. And there you go, that's how you land the P51.